The Zeldar Dominion prided itself on conquest. For centuries, they had crushed weaker species, spreading terror across the galaxy. Their warriors, bred for combat, believed in absolute dominance. No species had ever resisted them for long. Fear was their most effective weapon. When their scouts discovered humanity, the conclusion was immediate. Earth was primitive, its people weak. The Dominion's War Council barely discussed the invasion. There was no need. The humans would surrender like all the rest. The fleet moved swiftly, intercepting the deep space research vessel Curiosity before it could return to Earth. It was not a warship, merely a scientific expedition. The Zeldar saw this as a perfect opportunity. Break a human crew first, and Earth would kneel before the Dominion even knew what was happening. Aboard Curiosity, Captain Chun stood in the command module, watching the alien warships on the screen. The Zeldar transmission came through, their warlord's voice dripping with arrogance. Surrender, they demanded. Immediate compliance. No resistance. The crew remained silent, waiting for Chen's response. The captain's expression didn't change. Then, she smiled. Why, unnervingly so. The bridge remained still as she pressed the comm button and spoke. You want us to surrender? Her voice was calm. Too calm. You should have done your research first. The warlord bared his teeth, irritated. He repeated his demand, this time with a direct threat: resist, and they would be wiped from existence. The Zeldar were not patient. Captain Chun only tilted her head. Interesting. The warlord signaled his warriors. The humans would be taken alive. Their will would be broken. The Zeldar had done this 1,000 times before. They expected terror. Screaming. Pleas for mercy. What they got was laughter. Low at first, then growing. The human crew was laughing. It wasn't nervous or forced. It was genuine. The warlord hesitated. He had never seen this before. There was no fear in their eyes. No despair. They looked amused. The boarding order was given regardless. He told himself it didn't matter. But something felt wrong. The Curiosity's airlock hissed open. Zeldar warriors stormed in, towering figures with armored plating and bladed limbs. Humans were physically weaker, slower, unarmed. This should have been effortless. The first human they grabbed, a young engineer, stared up at his captor, grinning. Hey, he said, do you guys believe in ghosts? Before the Zeldar could respond, the engineer let out an exaggerated scream, flailing wildly. The warrior flinched, his grip loosening just enough for the human to slam his head forward into the alien's jaw. The warrior stumbled back. The human's forehead was bleeding, but he was still grinning. That usually works on bears, he muttered. The ship's interior became chaos. The crew fought back, not with strength but unpredictability. A biologist hurled a microscope into a warrior's eye. A security officer tackled a 7-foot-tall Zeldar with no regard for personal safety. One crew member bit an alien's arm, refusing to let go despite the pain. And the laughter continued. Even as they were overpowered, dragged away, beaten into submission, the humans kept smirking. The Zeldar had never seen anything like it. The prisoners were secured aboard the warship. The interrogation began immediately. The Dominion had perfected this process. They had broken entire civilizations in hours. Fear, pain, isolation, it worked every time. Or it should have. The first interrogation subject was the same engineer. The Zeldar captain loomed over him, demanding strategic data. The human shrugged. I can't help you, he said. But I can tell you about the time my uncle survived a plane crash with both legs broken and still managed to crawl 6 miles. The captain struck him across the face. The human barely reacted. That's supposed to hurt? He asked, spitting blood. The next prisoner, a medic, was placed under extreme sensory deprivation. Hours later, when the isolation chamber was opened, she was humming. The Zeldar started to worry. One warrior, confused, asked a human guard why they weren't afraid. The response was unsettling. Oh, we're terrified, the human admitted. We're just used to it. The Zeldar didn't understand. Until now, fear had always meant submission. But humans? Humans carried it differently. They had learned to laugh at it. And then came Captain Chun. She sat in the interrogation room, bound but unbothered. The Zeldar interrogator leaned in. "You will talk," he growled. Chun met his gaze. Then she smiled, wider than before, showing teeth. "You ever hear about what happens when a human is backed into a corner?" she asked. Her voice was light, conversational. "I'll give you a hint. It never ends well for the other guy." The interrogator tried to ignore the way her grin made his skin crawl. He tried to ignore the fact that he was sweating. "Are you afraid?" she asked. The Zeldar snarled. He slammed his fist on the table, ordering her silence. But Captain Chun wasn't listening. She was still smiling. The Zeldar ship was silent. Too silent. Warriors patrolled the halls, weapons ready. But something felt off. The humans had been secured. Their defiance should have faded by now. Yet, unease settled over the crew like a fog. The prisoners weren't acting like prisoners. The humans whispered among themselves, exchanged glances, smirked at their captors. When questioned, they gave absurd responses. One guard demanded a scientist state his rank. The human just chuckled. "I'm the guy who fixes problems." The Zeldar interrogator narrowed his eyes. "And what does that mean?" The human tilted his head. "You'll find out." The Zeldar considered increasing security. He dismissed the thought. These were unarmed captives. Their weapons were fear and pain. They would break. Then came the first incident. A Zeldar warrior found one of the human prisoners sitting in his cell, whispering. Not to himself, to something unseen. The warrior growled. "Who are you talking to?" The human looked up, eyes wide. He grinned. "Oh, you can't see them?" The warrior stiffened. The human leaned closer. "They can see you." The warrior flinched. He didn't know why. He stepped back, slammed the cell door shut, and walked away, heart pounding. More incidents followed. A human biologist recounted gruesome survival stories in horrifying detail. A mechanic casually described Earth's most extreme environments: acid lakes, radiation zones, frozen wastelands. "You think this ship is harsh?" she asked. "Try Siberia in the winter." The Zeldar were growing uneasy. Humans were supposed to be weak, fragile, but they spoke of suffering as if it were routine. They laughed about pain. They welcomed hardship. One warrior, frustrated, grabbed a medic by the collar. "What are you?" he hissed. The medic smirked. "Persistent." Another interrogator increased the pressure. Sleep deprivation, psychological manipulation, threats. It had worked on every species before. But humans? A human officer sat in a dim cell, eyes half-lidded from exhaustion. The interrogator leaned in. "Do you know how long you've been here?" The human nodded. 72 hours. The interrogator's mandibles twitched. "And how do you feel?" The human blinked. "Like finals week in college." The interrogator slammed the table. "This is not a game." The human yawned. "You ever gone 3 days without sleep while writing a dissertation?" The interrogator's frustration boiled over. He ordered an immediate demonstration of power. A warning. A human would be executed in front of the others. The Zeldar dragged a security officer into the holding chamber. The prisoners were forced to watch. The alien warrior raised his blade. Then the human chuckled. The Zeldar hesitated. "What's funny?" The officer exhaled through his nose. "You ever hear about the guy who got stabbed in the heart and lived?" The Zeldar tensed. The officer smiled. "Do it." The room was silent. The blade did not fall. For the first time in recorded history, a Zeldar execution was called off. The humans had flipped the dynamic. They weren't the ones afraid anymore. Fear seeped into the Zeldar ranks. They heard stories from the guards, how humans had fought wars where survival meant enduring unthinkable horrors, how they had walked through fire, starved for weeks, torn themselves apart just to keep going. The Zeldar had seen resilience before, but not like this. A warrior, frustrated, barked at his subordinate. "Why do they keep laughing?" The younger soldier shifted uneasily. "I don't know." The warrior snarled. "Then find out." A higher-ranking officer ordered new tests. The humans were forced into extreme conditions. One was placed in near-freezing temperatures. He shivered but grinned. "This reminds me of camping." Another was exposed to high gravity. He groaned, muscles straining. "Ever done push-ups with a weighted vest?" The Zeldar strategists began debating in hushed tones. This was not normal. No species should endure this. The paranoia spread. A warrior walked past a locked cell and heard whispering again. He turned, scowling. "Who are you talking to?" The human inside grinned. "Oh, just a friend." The warrior hesitated. The cell was empty. A technician refused to patrol alone. A guard refused to meet a human's gaze. Commander demanded answers. Then Captain Chun made her move. She had been waiting, watching, studying their captors. She understood something the Zeldar did not. Fear was a weapon, and the humans wielded it better. The escape began not with brute force, but with a whisper. The crew started rumors. They spoke of something lurking in the ship, something not human. They hinted at an unseen force, an entity that followed the Zeldar. The aliens scoffed at first. Then doors started opening by themselves. Shadows moved where they shouldn't. The lights flickered. Humans had hacked the systems. They were manipulating the ship itself. But the Zeldar, already unbalanced, didn't see sabotage. They saw ghosts. One guard fled his post, rambling about whispers in the dark. Another refused to patrol certain corridors. Then the first Zeldar died. Not in battle, not from wounds. A warrior was found slumped over his console, heart stopped. No injuries, no sign of struggle, just wide, terrified eyes. The Zeldar's medical team was baffled. The humans were not. Chun smirked as the guards eyed her nervously. "Some people can't handle stress," she mused. "Too bad." The fear spread like wildfire. The Zeldar whispered among themselves now, voices tinged with doubt. For the first time, they weren't sure who the real captives were. The Zeldar warship was coming apart, not in structure, but in discipline. Their warriors, once the pinnacle of ruthlessness, were second-guessing their every move. It was subtle at first. A hesitation before stepping into a dark corridor. A glance over the shoulder at nothing. Hands twitching on weapons that had never wavered before. The humans saw it, and they capitalized on it. It started with silence. The prisoners stopped talking. No jokes, no laughter, no defiant remarks. They sat still, watching, observing, calculating. The Zeldar didn't know what to make of it. They had braced for continued defiance, expected resistance. But this was worse. The lack of response made them paranoid. Were the humans scheming? Had they accepted their fate? The warriors exchanged uneasy looks. It was easier when the humans mocked them. This silence felt like a coiled spring, ready to snap. And then the humans stopped eating. Meals were delivered. They remained untouched. The Zeldar assumed it was an act of rebellion at first. But the humans didn't look weaker. They sat cross-legged in their cells, motionless. Their eyes had a strange glint. A guard approached Captain Chen's cell. She was sitting against the wall, arms resting on her knees. Her gaze lifted slowly. "Why aren't you eating?" the guard demanded. Chen smiled. "Not hungry." The Zeldar officer behind him scoffed. "Starvation will break you." Chen's smile widened. "You think this is starvation?" She tilted her head. "You should read about hunger strikes sometime." The Zeldar left, disturbed. Within hours, it spread. Humans refusing food, drinking only the bare minimum. No requests, no demands, no complaints. The War Council met to discuss it. A high-ranking strategist sneered. "They're weakening themselves." A lower-ranked officer hesitated. "Are they?" He swallowed. "They don't seem weaker." The strategist dismissed him. "They're pretending." Then the nightmares started. The Zeldar weren't sleeping well. Reports of strange sounds at night circulated. Shadows moving where no one stood. The sensation of being watched, even when alone. Some claimed they heard whispers, human voices speaking in the dark. But when they checked, the cells were silent. A technician swore he saw a human standing outside the brig. Impossible, given they were all still locked up. Another guard fired at a shape in the darkness, only to find nothing there. Tensions rose. The commander issued orders. Increase security, double patrols, ignore the humans' mind games. But the fear had already taken root. The first Zeldar defected not long after. A younger warrior, barely past his initiation, refused to enter the brig. His superior growled at him, demanding he perform his duty. The young warrior's hands trembled. "They don't die right," he muttered. The superior narrowed his eyes. "What? The humans?" the warrior whispered. "I read the reports. They survive things they shouldn't. They keep going when they should be dead." He looked around, as if afraid something was listening. "What if they're not normal?" His superior struck him, ordering him back to his post. But the damage was done. The idea had been spoken aloud. It lingered. The next day, that same warrior was gone. His quarters were empty. No sign of struggle. Just vanished. The Zeldar pretended it didn't happen. The second defection was louder. A mid-level officer stormed into the War Council chamber, eyes wild. "They're doing something to us," he hissed. "We need to get rid of them now." The commander frowned. "Elaborate." The officer clenched his jaw. "It's not just tricks. It's not just defiance. They change things." The War Council scoffed. The officer's desperation was unbecoming. But then he stepped closer, voice lowering. "They are not afraid of us. And now we are afraid of them." His hands twitched. "Doesn't that disturb you?" Silence. The officer took a breath. "We should kill them. All of them. Now." The commander exhaled. "We do not act from fear." But he didn't deny the growing dread. The humans, still locked away, said nothing. They just watched. Then came the broadcast. The warship's main screen flickered to life without command. The entire crew turned as an image filled the display. Captain Chen. She was smiling. No restraints. No bruises. No sign of fear. "Hello, boys," she greeted. "Hope you're sleeping well." The bridge officers scrambled, trying to shut it off. The controls didn't respond. Chun leaned forward. "You should have killed us when you had the chance." The screen cut to black. Every Zeldar on that ship felt the same cold realization at once. The humans were in control. The security systems failed next. Doors locked and unlocked at random. Weapons storage remained sealed. The ship's gravity fluctuated. The humans had taken their ship without lifting a finger. The panic hit like a tidal wave. Warriors barked orders, but discipline had crumbled. Some tried to flee. Others turned on their own, accusing each other of sabotage. And the humans? They sat in their cells untouched, waiting for the Zeldar to destroy themselves. The Zeldar had never experienced a mutiny. Their hierarchy was absolute, their discipline unshakable. At least that's what they had believed. Now their ship was in chaos. Some warriors barricaded themselves in the armory, convinced the humans had summoned something unnatural. Others refused to enter the brig at all. A handful of officers attempted to regain control, but paranoia had spread too far. They no longer trusted their own ranks. The ship's commander, hardened by decades of war, watched his people unravel. He refused to believe humans had done this through brute force. They had not overpowered the Zeldar. They had infected them. He had underestimated them. The situation demanded immediate action. He ordered an emergency lockdown of the brig, sealing off every corridor that led to the humans. If they could isolate them, perhaps they could regain control. But when the command was given, the system rejected it. Another order. Another failure. Then, a voice crackled over the ship's intercom. Smooth, calm, Chin. "Hey, Commander," she said, as if greeting an old friend. "Having some technical issues?" The bridge officers turned to their screens. Security footage showed the brig doors swinging open. Every human prisoner was standing, silent, smiling. The commander clenched his jaw. "How? You don't lock up humans," Chin mused. "You just give them time to get creative." The Zeldar were scrambling. Orders shouted. Weapons drawn. But it was too late. Humans had studied their captors from the moment they were taken. They learned the ship's rhythms, the security protocols, the weaknesses. They listened to the warriors' conversations, picked apart their fears. The hacking had begun days ago, subtly overriding command systems. They didn't just break out. They took over. The first human strike wasn't with weapons. It was psychological. Every screen flickered on, displaying images the Zeldar didn't understand. A human in a deep-sea pressure suit, surviving conditions that would crush their kind. A soldier in a desert war zone, pushing forward despite unbearable heat. A mountaineer covered in frost, grinning through an ice-covered beard. Then the videos changed. A fighter pilot ejecting at supersonic speeds and surviving. A medic pulling comrades from an explosion with a shattered arm. A scientist recounting how radiation had nearly killed him, but didn't. Humanity in its rawest form. The Zeldar had believed in their own superiority. They had conquered weaker species, bent civilizations to their will. But humans weren't weak. They were something else entirely. One warrior snapped first. He fired wildly at the screen, snarling, demanding it stop. The bulletproof display absorbed the shots, unchanged. The images continued. The second snap was louder. A junior officer turned on his superior, demanding they abandon ship. His superior struck him down, but the damage was done. The idea had taken root. Escape. The commander refused to entertain it. He gathered what remained of his loyal forces and marched toward the brig himself. If his warriors had failed, he would correct it personally. He never made it. The first explosion rocked the ship, followed by another. Humans had taken control of the engines. They weren't destroying the vessel. They were directing it. The commander reached the bridge, demanding a report. The navigation officer, barely keeping his composure, turned. "They're taking us toward an uncharted planet," he stammered. The commander's claws dug into the metal railing. "Why?" Then, a transmission came through. Chen again. "Fun fact about Earth," she said conversationally. "It wasn't always hospitable. We made it that way. We survived it." She leaned closer to the camera. "We're about to see how well you do." The ship shuddered as it entered the atmosphere. Alarms blared. The Zeldar weren't prepared for planetary landings outside of their own controlled zones. They were trained for conquests, not desperate descents. Chaos erupted. Some warriors tried to seize escape pods, only to find them disabled. Others turned on their leaders, demanding they surrender. The commander roared for order, but it was drowned by the screams of his own kind. The ship slammed into the planet's surface, skidding across rocky terrain. Fires broke out. The Zeldar who survived the crash staggered into an alien environment. They looked up. The sky was a swirling storm of violet clouds. Strange, spindly trees loomed in the distance. The air was thick, heavy, unfamiliar. This world was not theirs. Then the humans emerged, not beaten, not broken, thriving. They had unshackled themselves mid-descent, preparing for impact while their captors panicked. Now they stood tall, weapons scavenged, eyes sharp. Chun stepped forward. "Welcome to survival training," she said. The Zeldar looked at her, then at the landscape. The realization settled in. This wasn't a battlefield. This was a test. And humans never lost a test of endurance. Some Zeldar warriors dropped their weapons, already defeated. Others ran. It didn't matter. The war was over. The humans had won.